Arthur Thorne sat in the corner booth of a dimly lit diner, wearing a faded flannel shirt and checking a cheap plastic watch. To anyone passing by, he was just another struggling single father trying to make ends meet. But beneath the surface lay a secret worth millions, and a heart hardened by a string of women who only loved his bank account. Tonight was his 10th blind date in a month, and the trap was set. He didn't know that this specific evening wouldn't just test his date's character, but would shatter his own cynical worldview. One woman was about to see through the disguise, not to find the gold, but to find the man he had buried long ago. Arthur Thorne was a man of two very different lives. In the world of high finance, he was a shark, a visionary who had built a real estate empire from the ground up. Before he turned 35, he lived in a sprawling estate on the outskirts of the city, complete with a private chef, a glass-walled library, and a fleet of cars that most people only saw in magazines. However, in the world that truly mattered to him, he was simply Dad. His 7-year-old daughter, Lily, was the light of his life and the reason for every breath he took. Since his wife had passed away 4 years ago, Arthur had been fiercely protective of their little bubble. He wanted Lily to grow up grounded, surrounded by genuine people, and shielded from the vultures that tended to circle anyone with a net worth as high as his. This protective instinct had bled into his search for a partner. Arthur was lonely, though he rarely admitted it to his business associates. He missed having someone to share his day with, someone to laugh with over a glass of wine after Lily went to sleep. But every time he tried to date as Arthur Thorne, the millionaire, the results were disastrous. He would meet beautiful, successful women who seemed perfect on paper, only to realize they were more interested in the guest list for his next charity gala than the books Lily liked to read at bedtime. He had become weary of the performance, the polished smiles, and the calculated questions about his investment portfolio. 6 months ago, he decided to try a different approach. He created a persona. When he went on dates, he left the tailored suits in the wardrobe and opted for worn jeans and boots. He drove an old, dented sedan he had bought specifically for this purpose and kept a rusted toolbox in the back seat. He told his dates he worked as a freelance handyman, picking up odd jobs to support his daughter. He wanted to find a woman who would look at him and see a man worth loving, regardless of the balance in his savings account. He wanted someone who would appreciate his kindness, his sense of humor, and his devotion to Lily. Tonight was no different. He was sitting in the Rusty Spoon, a local diner known for its chipped mugs and greasy floors. It was the perfect stage for his charade. He adjusted his glasses, which were non-prescription and slightly smudged, and waited for a woman named Sarah. Sarah had been recommended by a mutual acquaintance who didn't know about Arthur's wealth. As he waited, he watched the staff move with practiced efficiency. One waitress in particular caught his eye. She wasn't the loudest or the fastest, but there was a grace to her movements. She had dark hair tied back in a messy bun and eyes that seemed to see everything happening in the room. When Sarah arrived, she was 20 minutes late and didn't offer an apology. She looked around the diner with a visible expression of distaste, her nose wrinkling at the smell of burnt coffee. Arthur rose to greet her, offering a warm, humble smile. He pulled out her chair, which creaked under her weight. Sarah barely acknowledged him, instead spending the first 5 minutes of their conversation complaining about the lack of valet parking in the neighborhood. Arthur listened patiently, nodding in all the right places, while inwardly ticking off another box on his list of disappointments. As the night progressed, the conversation remained painfully one-sided. Sarah spoke at length about her career in high-end fashion and her aspirations to move to a more prestigious zip code. When she finally asked Arthur about his work, he gave his standard speech about fixing leaky pipes and repairing fences. The shift in her demeanor was instantaneous. Her eyes glazed over, and she began checking her phone with increasing frequency. She didn't ask about Lily. She didn't ask about his interests. She simply waited for the bill to arrive. Arthur felt a familiar pang of sadness. It wasn't that he expected every woman to be a saint, but he hoped for a shred of basic human curiosity. He called for the check, and the waitress he had noticed earlier, whose name tag read Clara, approached their table. She placed the bill down and lingered for a second longer than necessary. She glanced at Sarah, who was busy reapplying lipstick, and then looked Arthur directly in the eye. There was no pity in her gaze, only a strange, knowing spark. "Will there be anything else for you tonight?" Clara asked, her voice soft but steady. "No, thank you," Arthur replied, reaching for his worn leather wallet. He carefully counted out the cash, making sure to include a modest tip that fit his handyman budget. Sarah stood up before the transaction was even finished. "It was nice meeting you, Arthur," she said, her tone suggesting it was anything but. "Good luck with the plumbing." She walked out without looking back. Arthur sat there for a moment, staring at the empty chair. He felt the weight of his deception, wondering if he was being too harsh or if the world truly was as superficial as it seemed. He began to gather his things, but as he stood up, Clara appeared by his side to clear the table. "You know," she said quietly, stacking the heavy ceramic plates, "you're a terrible liar." Arthur froze. He looked at her, his heart skipping a beat. "I beg your pardon?" Clara didn't look up from her work. "The clothes are right. The car in the lot is convincing. Even the way you hold yourself is slightly slumped, like a man who spends all day on his feet. But your hands, Arthur. A handyman doesn't have hands that soft. And a man who is truly struggling doesn't have a watch with a movement that sounds like a Swiss masterpiece, even if the casing is plastic." Arthur looked down at his wrist. He had forgotten to swap out his grandfather's internal watch mechanism, a habit of comfort he hadn't thought anyone would notice. He looked back at Clara, who was now smiling at him. It wasn't a mocking smile. It was one of genuine amusement. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice dropping an octave. "I'm just the girl who brings the coffee," she replied, tossing a damp rag over her shoulder. "But I've watched you come in here 4 times in the last month with 4 different women. You play the part well, but you're looking for something you're never going to find by wearing a mask." Before he could respond, a bell rang from the kitchen, and Clara disappeared into the back. Arthur stood in the middle of the diner, the smell of grease and stale coffee surrounding him, feeling more exposed than he ever had in a boardroom. For the first time in years, someone had seen him. The walk to his car felt longer than usual. Arthur's mind was racing. He was used to being the one in control, the one who dictated the terms of every interaction. To have a waitress in a budget diner see through a disguise he had spent months perfecting was unsettling. Yet as he drove home to his silent mansion, he couldn't stop thinking about Clara's eyes. They hadn't been filled with greed or calculation. They had been observant, perhaps even empathetic. Over the next few days, Arthur tried to return to his normal routine. He sat through meetings, reviewed contracts, and played with Lily in the garden. But the image of the diner kept returning to him. He found himself questioning his own experiment. Was he being unfair? Was he intentionally setting these women up to fail by presenting them with a version of himself that was designed to be overlooked? He thought about what Clara had said. "You're looking for something you're never going to find by wearing a mask." A week later, Arthur found himself driving back to the Rusty Spoon. He wasn't on a date this time. He was dressed in his actual clothes, a simple but expensive navy jumper and dark trousers. He parked his luxury SUV 3 blocks away and walked the rest of the distance. He didn't want to show off, but he didn't want to hide anymore either. He just wanted to talk to the woman who had caught him out. When he entered, the diner was quiet. The mid-afternoon lull had set in. Clara was sitting at the far end of the counter, poring over a thick textbook. She looked up when the bell above the door chimed, and a flicker of recognition crossed her face. "Back for more punishment?" she asked, leaning back on her stool. "I don't see a date with you today." "No date," Arthur said, taking a seat at the counter. "Just a man looking for a decent cup of coffee and perhaps an explanation." Clara poured him a mug without being asked. "An explanation for what? Why I called you out? Or why you're pretending to be someone you're not?" "Both," Arthur admitted. Clara took a sip of her own drink. "I've worked here for 3 years, Arthur. I see a lot of people. I see the ones who are actually struggling, the ones who count every penny before they order a side of toast. And I see the ones who are playing a game. You weren't counting pennies. You were counting reactions. I was trying to find someone real," Arthur defended himself. "Someone who wouldn't care about the money. And in doing so, you were being the most unreal person in the room," Clara countered. "Relationships are built on trust, aren't they? How do you expect to find something real when the very foundation of your introduction is a lie? You're testing people, Arthur. Nobody likes to be tested without knowing they're in an exam. Arthur was silent for a moment. Her words stung because they were true. He had been so focused on protecting himself that he hadn't considered the unfairness of his methods. He looked at the textbook she was reading. Nursing? Almost finished, she said with a proud smile. I work double shifts here to pay for the tuition. It's hard, but it'll be worth it. I want to work in the pediatric ward. Arthur felt a surge of respect. Here was a woman who was actually doing what he pretended to do, working hard, sacrificing and building a future. That's impressive, Clara, truly. It's just life, she shrugged. So are you going to tell me who you really are? Or should I keep guessing based on your very expensive shoes? Arthur laughed, a genuine sound that he hadn't made in a long time. For the next hour they talked. He told her about Lily, about his late wife, and about the business he had built. He didn't brag. He just spoke the truth. Clara, in turn, told him about her upbringing in a small town, her love for old movies, and her dream of making a difference in the lives of sick children. There was an ease between them that Arthur hadn't experienced with anyone else. There were no power dynamics, no hidden agendas, just two people talking over bad coffee. As the diner began to fill up for the dinner rush, Arthur realized he didn't want the conversation to end. Clara, would you like to go to dinner with me? A real dinner. No disguises, no diners, and definitely no tests. Clara looked at him, her expression unreadable for a moment. Then she smiled. I'd like that, Arthur, but on one condition. Anything, he said. We go somewhere where I don't have to wear an apron, and you don't have to pretend you can't afford the dessert. They exchanged numbers, and Arthur walked out of the diner feeling lighter than he had in years. He felt like he was finally moving in the right direction. However, as he reached his car, his phone buzzed. It was his lawyer. There was a complication with a major land acquisition, a legal battle that threatened to expose his personal life to the public eye. Arthur sighed. The world of Arthur Thorne, the millionaire, was crashing back in, and he wasn't sure if his blossoming connection with Clara could survive the fallout of his real life. Over the next 2 weeks, Arthur and Clara saw each other 3 times. Each date was better than the last. He took her to a quiet bistro, a botanical garden, and an outdoor jazz concert. He found himself telling her things he had never told anyone else, his fears about being a single father, his regrets about working too much in his younger years. Clara was a tether to reality. She challenged his cynicism and made him see the beauty in small things. But the pressure of his business life was mounting. The legal battle was becoming messy. The press had picked up on the story, and journalists were starting to dig into his private affairs. Arthur knew it was only a matter of time before his secret was splashed across the front pages. He wanted to tell Clara everything before she read it in the news, but he was terrified. He was terrified that she would see him as the cold, calculating businessman the media portrayed him as. He was terrified that the world he had tried to hide would drive her away. One evening, while they were walking through a park, Arthur prepared to come clean. Clara, there's something I need to tell you about the business. It's getting complicated, and his phone rang. It was Lily's school. His heart sank. Lily had been involved in an accident on the playground and was being taken to the hospital. All thoughts of his confession vanished. I have to go, Arthur stammered, his face pale. It's Lily. I'm coming with you, Clara said firmly, not missing a beat. In the rush to the hospital, Arthur didn't have time to worry about his image or his secrets. He was just a father in agony. When they arrived, the waiting room was a blur of sterile lights and anxious faces. Arthur was frantic, demanding answers from the reception desk. Clara stepped in, her nursing training taking over. She spoke calmly to the staff, using medical terminology that gained their immediate cooperation. She moved with a quiet authority that calmed Arthur's spiraling nerves. As they waited for news, Arthur sat with his head in his hands. Clara sat beside him, her hand resting on his shoulder. In that moment, he realized that he didn't care about the money or the business. He only cared about the little girl behind those double doors and the woman sitting next to him. But the peace was short-lived. A group of photographers appeared at the hospital entrance, lured by a tip-off about the famous Arthur Thorne. The flashes of their cameras cut through the quiet of the hallway, and Arthur knew his time had run out. The chaos in the hospital lobby was a stark contrast to the quiet tension of the waiting room. Security guards were scrambling to keep the paparazzi at bay, but the damage was done. Arthur saw the confusion on Clara's face as the flashes reflected in her eyes. She looked from the shouting men with cameras to Arthur, who was now standing, looking every bit the powerful mogul he usually tried to hide. "Arthur, what is happening?" Clara asked, her voice trembling slightly. "I can't explain right now." "Clara, I'm so sorry," Arthur said, his eyes darting toward the hallway where the doctor was finally emerging. The doctor approached them looking weary. "Mr. Thorne, your daughter is stable. It's a broken arm and a mild concussion, but she's going to be fine. She's asking for you." Arthur let out a breath he didn't know he was holding. The relief was overwhelming, but it was immediately tempered by the sight of a reporter pushing past a guard. "Mr. Thorne, can you comment on the allegations regarding the East Side development? Is it true you're facing a multi-million-pound lawsuit?" Arthur ignored him, grabbing Clara's hand and pulling her toward the recovery ward. He didn't stop until they were behind the security-locked doors of the private wing. Only then did he turn to her. The silence of the hallway felt heavy. Clara pulled her hand away. Her expression wasn't one of anger, but of profound disappointment. "Multi-million-pound lawsuit? East Side development? Arthur, I knew you were well off, but I didn't realize I was dating a headline." "Clara, listen to me," Arthur pleaded. "I wanted to tell you. I was going to tell you tonight in the park, but the situation with Lily took over. Everything I told you about myself is true. The feelings are true." "Is it?" Clara asked, her voice rising. "You spent months lying to women at my diner, pretending to be a handyman. Then you start seeing me, and you still keep the scale of your life a secret. Do you have any idea how it feels to find out who the person you're seeing is from a shouting reporter in a hospital?" "I was trying to protect what we have," Arthur argued. "My world it's a circus, Clara. People see the money and they stop seeing me. I didn't want that to happen with us. So you decided to treat me like everyone else? You decided I wasn't trustworthy enough to handle the truth?" Clara shook her head. "You're so afraid of people being fake that you've become the fakest person I know. You hide behind personas and security guards because you're terrified of being vulnerable." "That's not fair," Arthur said, his voice cracking. "I am being vulnerable with you." "No, you're being controlled," Clara snapped. "You're controlling the narrative. That's not vulnerability. That's a strategy. I'm going to go check on Lily, because that little girl deserves someone in the room who isn't thinking about their public image." She walked past him and entered Lily's room. Arthur stood in the hallway, alone. He felt a deep sense of shame. He had spent so long trying to find someone who wasn't a gold digger, that he had pushed away the only woman who actually cared about his soul. He had built walls so high that even when he tried to let someone in, he was still standing behind them. Inside the room, Clara was a different person. She sat by Lily's bed speaking in soft, soothing tones. Lily, her arm in a bright purple cast, was smiling. Clara told her stories about the diner, about the funny people who came in for breakfast, and about the magic of nursing. Arthur watched through the small window in the door. He saw the way Clara looked at his daughter, with genuine love and concern. She didn't see a millionaire's daughter. She saw a brave little girl who had had a scary day. Eventually, Clara came out. She didn't look at Arthur. "She's asleep. The nurse says she can go home tomorrow morning." "Clara, please," Arthur said. "Let me take you home. Let's talk." "I'll take a taxi, Arthur," she said coldly. "I think you have enough to deal with. The reporters are still downstairs, and I'm sure your lawyers are calling. You should go back to your world. It seems to suit you." She walked away, her footsteps echoing on the linoleum floor. Arthur watched her go, feeling a void opening up in his chest. He spent the night in a chair next to Lily's bed, but he didn't sleep. He watched the news on his phone, headlines about his business, photos of him looking distraught at the hospital, and speculation about his mystery woman. The next morning, the reality of his situation hit him with full force. His business rivals were using the lawsuit to attempt a hostile takeover of his company. His board of directors was demanding a public statement, and most importantly, Lily was waking up and asking where the nice lady had gone. Arthur realized he had reached a breaking point. He had spent his entire life building an empire to provide security for his family, but in the process, he had created an environment where love couldn't breathe. He had been so busy guarding his treasure that he hadn't noticed he was living in a cage. He called his head of PR and gave a single instruction: cancel the press conference. I'm not playing their game anymore. He then called his lead lawyer. Settle the lawsuit. I don't care about the cost. Just make it go away. I have more important things to attend to. Finally, he picked up Lily and carried her to the car. As they drove away from the hospital, past the flashing lights and the prying eyes, Arthur made a decision. He wasn't going to be the millionaire single dad anymore. He wasn't going to be the handyman either. He was going to be the man Clara saw through, the man who was imperfect, scared but finally ready to be honest. He drove straight to the Rusty Spoon. It was early, and the diner was just opening. He saw Clara through the window, setting up the coffee stations. He felt a wave of nerves, worse than any multi-million-pound negotiation he had ever faced. He looked at Lily in the back seat. Hey, sweetheart, he said. I need to go talk to Clara. Do you think you can wait here for a minute? Is she mad at us, Dad? Lily asked, her large eyes filled with worry. No, Lily, she's mad at me, and she has every right to be. But I'm going to try and fix it. Arthur stepped out of the car and walked toward the diner. He didn't hide his SUV this time. He didn't slouch his shoulders. He walked in as himself. Clara looked up, and for a moment the world stopped. She didn't say anything, but her eyes were guarded. I settled the lawsuit, Arthur said, standing by the counter. And I told my board to back off. I'm stepping down as CEO for a while. Clara put down a stack of napkins. Why are you telling me this, Arthur? Because you were right, he said, moving closer. I was hiding. I was so afraid of being hurt or used that I forgot how to be a human being. I used my money as a shield, and when that didn't work, I used a lie as a shield. But the truth is, I'm just a man who was incredibly lucky to have a daughter like Lily, and incredibly stupid for letting a woman like you walk away. Clara stayed silent, her gaze unwavering. I don't want to be a project or a headline, Arthur continued. I just want to be the guy who buys you coffee while you study. I want to be the guy who supports your dreams while you're supporting mine. I'm not asking for a second chance at a date. I'm asking for a chance to start over. No masks, just me. Clara looked out the window at Lily, who was waving from the car with her cast. A small smile played at the corners of Clara's mouth. You're still a terrible liar, Arthur Thorne. I'm working on it, he whispered. Good, she said, finally stepping around the counter. Because if you ever lie to me again, I'm going to make sure your next cup of coffee is 90% salt. Arthur laughed, and for the first time in a very long time, the weight on his shoulders didn't feel like a burden. It felt like a foundation. The months that followed were a whirlwind of adjustment and discovery. Arthur stayed true to his word. He stepped back from the day-to-day operations of Thorne Enterprises, appointing a trusted colleague as interim CEO. He stayed on the board, but his priorities had shifted dramatically. He spent his mornings taking Lily to school and his afternoons studying, with Clara in the quiet corners of the university library. For Clara, the transition was equally significant. She wasn't used to someone taking care of her. She had spent her entire adult life being the provider, the worker, the one who survived. Having Arthur offer to pay for her final semester was a point of major contention. They had their first real couple argument over it. I've worked for everything I have, Arthur, she had said, her eyes flashing with that familiar spark of independence. I don't need a benefactor. I'm not being a benefactor, Arthur had countered, his voice calm but firm. I'm being your partner. If the roles were reversed, and you had the means to help me achieve my dream faster, wouldn't you? It took time, but they eventually found a middle ground. Arthur didn't pay her tuition, but he bought her every medical textbook she needed and made sure she never had to work a double shift at the diner again. He wanted her to focus on her exams, and in return, she taught him how to live a life that wasn't measured in profit margins. Lily blossomed under Clara's influence. The little girl who had lost her mother so young found a confidant and a role model. Clara didn't try to replace Arthur's late wife. She simply carved out her own space in Lily's heart. They spent weekends at the estate, which Clara slowly transformed from a cold architectural marvel into a home. She brought in plants, soft blankets, and the kind of lived-in clutter that Arthur had once been too disciplined to allow. However, the millionaire aspect of Arthur's life didn't just disappear. The public remained fascinated by the story of the tycoon and the waitress. Tabloids ran features on them, some kind, others cruel. There were articles speculating that Clara was a Cinderella story who had hit the jackpot. These comments hurt her, digging into her deepest insecurities. She worried that people would always look at her and see a woman who had won, a rich man, rather than a woman who had worked her way through nursing school. One evening, after a particularly nasty article was published online, Arthur found Clara sitting on the terrace, staring out at the gardens. "They don't know you, Clara," he said, sitting beside her. "I know," she sighed. "But sometimes, I wonder if the world will ever let us just be us, without the labels, without the millionaire and the waitress tags." "The world only sees what it wants to see," Arthur said, taking her hand. "But I see you. Lily sees you, and the kids you're going to help in the hospital will see you. That's what matters." The emotional peak of their journey came on the day of Clara's graduation. Arthur and Lily were in the front row, Lily wearing a dress Clara had helped her pick out, and Arthur holding a bouquet of flowers so large it was slightly ridiculous. When Clara's name was called, the applause was thunderous. She had graduated at the top of her class. As she walked across the stage, Clara looked at Arthur. She remembered the man in the smudged glasses at the diner, the man who was so afraid of being loved for the wrong reasons that he almost missed out on being loved for the right ones. She realized that Arthur's wealth wasn't his money. It was his capacity to change, to listen, and to grow. The celebration that night was small. No gala, no cameras, no press. Just Arthur, Clara, and Lily at a small Italian restaurant Clara had always wanted to try. Over dinner, Arthur pulled out a small box. It wasn't a ring, not yet. It was a key. "This is to a small apartment near the hospital," Arthur said. "I know you want your independence, and I know you want to be close to work. I bought the building, but this unit is yours. No rent, no strings. It's a gift for the nurse who saved me." Clara looked at the key, then at Arthur. "You bought the building?" "I couldn't help myself," Arthur grinned. "I'm still a real estate guy at heart. But the apartment is yours to do with as you wish." Clara laughed, tears pricking her eyes. "You're impossible." "I know," he said. "But I'm your impossible." In that moment, the consequences of Arthur's past deceptions felt like a lifetime ago. He had learned that honesty wasn't just about telling the truth. It was about being brave enough to show your true self, flaws and all. He had realized that people don't fall in love with bank accounts or disguises. They fall in love with the person who stays when the lights go out and the masks come off. But the final test was yet to come. A few weeks after graduation, Arthur received a call from his former business partners. There was a crisis that only he could handle, a situation that required him to return to the world of high-stakes corporate warfare. He had to decide if he could step back into that world without losing the man he had become. He feared that the shark would swallow the father and the partner. He sat Clara down and explained the situation. "They need me back just for a few months. If I don't go, thousands of people could lose their jobs." Clara didn't hesitate. "Then you go. But you go as the man you are now. You don't put the mask back on, Arthur. You lead with the heart I know you have." Arthur realized then that he didn't need to hide his world from Clara. And he didn't need to hide Clara from his world. They were part of each other now. The lesson was clear. True wealth isn't about what you have. It's about who you have by your side when the stakes are highest. The return to the corporate world was different this time. Arthur walked into the Thorne Enterprises boardroom not as a man with something to prove, but as a man with something to protect. He handled the crisis with a new sense of perspective. He was firmer on ethics, more compassionate toward his employees, and refused to work past 6 o'clock. He made it clear that his family came first, and to his surprise, the business world respected him more for it. Clara started her residency at the pediatric hospital. She was exactly the kind of nurse she had dreamed of being. Patient, skilled, and deeply kind. She didn't tell her colleagues about Arthur's status. She wanted to be known for her work, not her partner. It wasn't until Arthur showed up at the hospital one evening to drop off dinner for her shift that the secret came out. But by then, she had already earned the respect of everyone on the ward. One Saturday afternoon, a year after they had first met, Arthur took Clara back to the Rusty Spoon. The diner looked exactly the same cracked tiles, the same smell of grease, and the same bell above the door. They sat in the same booth where Arthur had sat on his 10th disastrous blind date. "Do you remember what you said to me that night?" Arthur asked, stirring his coffee. "I told you that you were a terrible liar," Clara smiled. "And you were right," Arthur said. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a ring. It wasn't flashy or oversized. It was a simple, elegant band with a single perfect diamond. "I'm done lying, Clara. I'm done pretending. I want to spend the rest of my life being exactly who I am with you. Will you marry me?" The diner went quiet. The regular customers, most of whom knew Clara, held their breath. Clara looked at the ring, then at the man who had changed her life as much as she had changed his. "Yes," she whispered. "On one condition." Arthur laughed. "Another condition?" "That we still come here for coffee once a month," she said. "To remind us where we started." "Deal," Arthur said, sliding the ring onto her finger. Their wedding was a beautiful blend of their two worlds. It was held in the gardens of Arthur's estate, but the guests included both high-powered executives and the staff from the Rusty Spoon. Lily served as the flower girl, beaming with pride. It was a day filled with laughter, music, and a profound sense of peace. As the years went by, Arthur and Clara built a life that was rich in every sense of the word. They had another child, a son, and their home was always filled with the chaos of a happy family. Arthur eventually retired fully from the business world, focusing his energy on philanthropy and spending time with his children. Clara became a head nurse, leading her department with grace and dedication. The Millionaire. Single dad who once hid behind a flannel shirt had found something far more valuable than his fortune. He had found a partner who challenged him, a woman who saw through his defenses, and a love that was built on the solid ground of truth. He learned that the greatest risk in life isn't losing your money, but losing yourself in the pursuit of protecting it. Arthur often thought back to those blind dates and the cynical man he used to be. He realized that his test had been a reflection of his own fear. He had been looking for someone to save him from his own isolation, not realizing that he had to be willing to be seen before he could be found. The Rusty Spoon eventually closed down when the owner retired, but Arthur bought the building and turned it into a community center and a scholarship fund for aspiring nurses. A small plaque by the door read, "In this spot, a man stopped lying and a woman started listening. Dedicated to the truth that sets us free." In the end, Arthur Thorne's story wasn't about a rich man pretending to be poor. It was about a man who discovered that the only things worth having are the things you can't buy: loyalty, laughter, and a love that doesn't care about the labels the world tries to pin on you. He and Clara lived their lives with open hearts, teaching their children that the most important thing you can ever be is yourself. Arthur Thorne's journey reminds us that we often build walls under the guise of protection, only to find that those same walls keep out the very happiness we seek. When he stopped testing the world and started trusting himself, he found a love that was far more valuable than his millions. True connection doesn't require a disguise. It requires the courage to be vulnerable and the honesty to be seen. In a world that often values the glitter over the gold, remember that the most beautiful thing you can offer someone is your true, unmasked self. Thank you for listening to this story of transformation and truth. If this touched your heart, don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories about the human spirit. Until next time, stay true to yourself.